He's trespassing. Arrest him before he gets back on the property." The scream cut through the quiet morning before I had even opened my truck door. Every conversation stopped. Heads turned. Someone whispered, "That's him." A phone came up. Then another. By the time I stepped onto the gravel, half the neighborhood was watching. 2 sheriff's deputies stood in the middle of my driveway. A patrol SUV blocked the entrance. From a distance, it looked like I had been caught committing a crime. I shut off the engine. The truck door clicked shut behind me. Gravel crunched beneath my boots. I kept walking. Slowly. Calmly. One deputy nodded. "Morning. Daniel Mercer?" "Yes, sir." Before he could continue, the woman marched forward with a thick leather binder tucked under her arm. She never looked at me. She looked at the deputies. "That's him," she announced. "We've warned him for months. He keeps trespassing on HOA property." She lifted the binder. "Everything is documented." "About time," someone in the crowd muttered. A few neighbors nodded. One man folded his arms. Another kept recording with his phone. The woman noticed. She smiled. "I'm Karen Holloway," she said confidently, "president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." She looked straight at the sheriff's SUV. "This ends today." The deputy accepted her binder. He didn't open it. He looked at me instead. "Mr. Mercer, what's your side?" "I'll answer every question you have." I glanced at Karen. "But first, may I ask Mrs. Holloway one?" She folded her arms. "Go ahead. How long have you lived here?" She answered immediately. "Almost 3 years." I nodded once. "My grandfather bought this property in 1968. Karen gave a small laugh. "That doesn't matter." "Maybe." I shrugged. "Maybe it does. According to our records, your driveway crosses HOA property. County records." I asked. She hesitated. Just for a heartbeat. "HOA records." Nobody said anything. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt longer. Even the man recording lowered his phone slightly. Then the younger deputy wandered away from the group. He wasn't watching Karen anymore. He was staring at something beside the old fence. He crouched, brushed away a layer of dirt with his glove. Then he stopped moving. "Sheriff," he called, "you should see this." A second patrol SUV rolled to a stop. The sheriff stepped out carrying a slim county folder. Karen walked toward him immediately. "Sheriff, everything you need is in here." She tapped the binder. Our attorney reviewed every document. "Thank you." He accepted the binder with one hand. He never opened it. Instead, he walked straight past Karen. Straight past me. He stopped beside the rusted steel survey monument sticking out of the ground. He knelt beside it, brushed away a little more dirt. "Read the stamped numbers." Nobody interrupted him. Even Karen waited. Finally, the sheriff stood. He looked down the gravel road disappearing between the old oak trees. Then he turned toward me. "Mr. Mercer," he pointed at the survey marker. "Before we talk about trespassing." A brief pause. "Why is this county monument older than every house in this subdivision?" Karen answered before I could. "Because it's irrelevant." The sheriff never looked at her. "Maybe." Another pause. "Or maybe it's the only thing here that hasn't changed." Nobody laughed. The breeze moved quietly through the trees. Somewhere behind us, I heard another phone stop recording. Standing there beside the driveway my family had used for more than half a century, I realized Karen had made a mistake much bigger than calling the sheriff. She had invited the county to inspect the one piece of evidence that had been patiently waiting more than 50 years for someone to ask the right question. Karen smiled. She actually looked relieved. The sheriff's question didn't seem to bother her at all. "It's just an old survey marker," she said. "The subdivision was built years later. Those old markers don't control HOA property." The sheriff didn't answer. He knelt beside the monument again. His glove brushed away another layer of dirt. He leaned closer. "You seeing this?" he asked the younger deputy. "Yes, sir." "Original county cap?" The deputy nodded. "Looks like it." Karen let out a quiet laugh. "Sheriff, we're here because he's trespassing, not because somebody found an old piece of metal." A few homeowners laughed with her. One voice came from the crowd. "Exactly." The sheriff stood. He dusted off his hands. Then, for the first time, he opened Karen's binder. A page turned. Then another. The sound of paper filled the silence. "Violation notices," he said quietly. "Flip. Board meeting minutes. Flip. Attorney correspondence. Flip." He stopped. "Mrs. Holloway?" "Yes." "Where's the recorded deed?" Karen blinked. "Excuse me." The deed transferring this entrance road to the HOA. She answered almost immediately. The development documents established the HOA boundary. I'm asking about the deed. Our attorney reviewed everything. That's not what I asked. The smile on Karen's face tightened. The association has maintained this entrance since the neighborhood opened. The sheriff nodded once. Maintenance. He closed the binder halfway. Not ownership. Nobody laughed this time. Even the breeze seemed to disappear. I stayed exactly where I was. My father always believed silence had a way of exposing weak answers. The sheriff looked toward me. Mr. Mercer. Yes, sir. How long has your family owned this property? Since 1968. Do you still have the original deed? Yes, sir. Karen stepped in before he could continue. Anyone can say they have a deed. I looked at her. I didn't say I had one. She frowned. What? I said I still have the original one. A few heads turned toward Karen. Nobody spoke. Then the younger deputy called out again. Sheriff. He was standing nearly 30 feet farther down the fence line. There's another monument. We walked over together. Hidden beneath the tall grass sat a second steel survey marker. The deputy brushed it clean and compared the stamp number with the notes in his notebook. Same survey line, he said. Both monuments predate the subdivision. Karen folded her arms. They're still irrelevant. The sheriff didn't argue. He simply looked from one monument to the other. Then he followed the old fence line all the way toward my farmhouse. Interesting, he said quietly. He pulled out his phone. County mapping. Karen looked surprised. Why are you calling them? I'd like to verify. These control numbers. Sheriff. Her confidence returned. Our attorney already reviewed all of this. I'm sure he did. He listened for a few moments after the call connected. Thank you. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. County mapping confirmed both survey monuments are active county control monuments. One homeowner frowned. Is that good? The sheriff gave a small shrug. It's information. Another neighbor spoke up. What does that mean? The sheriff looked back at the old monument. It means this marker is part of the county's official survey network. He turned toward me again. Mr. Mercer, how far is your house? About a quarter mile. Do you still have your original deed and survey there? Yes, sir. Can you bring them? Absolutely. Karen stepped forward. Why do we need his paperwork? You already have ours. The sheriff closed her binder and handed it back. Because so far. He paused. I've seen HOA records. Another pause. Now I'd like to see the property records. Karen reached for the binder, but this time she didn't have an answer ready. And as I climbed back into my truck to retrieve the documents my father had protected for decades, I realized something had quietly changed. The investigation was no longer focused on whether I belonged on that road. It was focused on why the HOA couldn't prove that I didn't. The drive back to the farmhouse took less than 10 minutes. It felt longer. My father's voice kept replaying in my head. Don't argue. Let the records do the talking. By the time I turned onto the gravel road, I wasn't thinking about Karen anymore. I was thinking about the old green metal document box waiting inside the house. I parked. The truck door closed behind me. The farmhouse was quiet, just the wind moving through the oak trees. I walked straight to my father's study. Nothing had changed. His reading chair still faced the window. His glasses still rested on the corner of the desk. Even the old coffee stain was still there. I opened the bottom drawer, pulled out the dented green metal box, carried it to the kitchen table. The lid creaked as I lifted it. Inside sat more than 50 years of my family's history. Not photographs, not letters, records. The original warranty deed, certified surveys, property tax receipts, title documents, boundary reports. Every page was neatly labeled in my father's handwriting. Paper remembers better than people. He used to say that every time I asked why he never threw anything away, I smiled without realizing it. He had been preparing for this day long before either of us knew it was coming. I opened the original deed. The county seal was still perfectly clear. June, 1968. Samuel Mercer. My grandfather's signature. I could almost hear him laughing the first time he handed me the keys to his old tractor. Take care of the land, he'd said. And someday it'll take care of you. Back then, there wasn't a subdivision. No HOA. No entrance monument. Just open pasture and a narrow dirt road leading home. My father expanded the driveway years later. He replaced washed-out gravel after every heavy storm. Every few years, he'd hire a surveyor. Not because anyone questioned the boundary, but because he believed good records prevented bad arguments. 6 months before he passed away, he placed this same green box on the kitchen table between us. "One day," he said, "someone you've never met will tell you where your property begins." I laughed. Who would do that? He didn't. Someone who trusts the wrong piece of paper. He slid the box toward me. "When that day comes, don't try to out-argue them." Tap. His finger landed on the deed. "Let this do the talking." Standing there now, I finally understood exactly what he meant. I placed the original deed into a leather folder, then the certified survey, then the latest county tax record. Before closing the box, one folded sheet tucked beneath the surveys caught my eye. I'd never noticed it before. It was one page. My father's handwriting. Just a few lines. "If ownership is ever questioned, start with the county. Not opinions. Not maps. The county." I folded the note and slipped it into the folder beside the deed. It felt less like advice and more like instructions left for exactly this morning. I closed the metal box. The latch snapped shut with a sharp click. The sound echoed through the quiet kitchen. A few minutes later, I was driving back toward the subdivision. The leather folder rested on the passenger seat. I glanced at it once at a stop sign. Karen had arrived carrying confidence. I was returning with 50 years of evidence. As the subdivision entrance came back into view, I could still see the sheriff standing beside the old survey monument. He hadn't moved very far. Neither had the truth. The only question left was whether both sets of records would tell the same story, or whether one of them had been telling the wrong story all along. As I drove back toward the subdivision, one sentence kept replaying in my head. "Now I'd like to see the property records." The sheriff had said it almost casually. Most people probably didn't notice it. I did. Because the moment he asked for county records instead of HOA paperwork, the entire investigation changed direction. Suddenly, I wasn't the one being questioned anymore. The paperwork was. That question took me back 8 months. Long before sheriff's deputies. Long before lawyers. Long before Karen stood in my driveway accusing me of trespassing. It all started with an envelope. I found it in my mailbox on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The Willow Creek HOA logo was printed neatly across the front. I carried it inside, poured myself a cup of coffee, and opened it at the kitchen table. At first, everything looked harmless. Community events, pool hours, trash collection schedules, landscaping reminders. None of it had anything to do with me. Then one sentence caught my attention. "We appreciate neighboring property owners respecting HOA-managed access roads serving the community." I read it again. Then I looked out the kitchen window toward my gravel driveway. It was the only road in the area serving property outside the subdivision. "That's odd," I said quietly. Still, I didn't think much of it. I folded the letter, set it beside the coffee mug, and went on with my day. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived. This one felt different the moment I opened it. The language was more formal, more direct. It warned that unauthorized use of HOA access roads could result in enforcement action. My address was printed correctly across the top. I looked at the letter, then back at the driveway outside. "They can't be talking about my road," I muttered. I almost called the HOA that afternoon. Instead, I remembered something my father used to say. Never argue with a letter until you understand why it was written. So I waited. A few days later, I was replacing a broken fence board near the entrance when a landscaping truck turned onto my driveway. The foreman leaned out the window. "Morning. Morning." He smiled. "We're here to maintain the HOA entrance." I pointed back toward the subdivision. "You passed it." He frowned. "No, sir." He reached across the seat and unfolded a laminated color map. "This is where they sent us." I walked over. Green shaded areas. Irrigation zones. Landscaping notes. My driveway was shaded exactly the same way as the HOA common property. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "HOA office." "Have you ever seen the county plat?" He shook his head immediately. "No, sir." "Why not?" He shrugged. "Nobody ever gave us one." I looked back at the map, then at my driveway. The foreman wasn't trying to take my property. He honestly believed he was standing on HOA land. "You're in the wrong place," I said. "This driveway belongs to my family." He looked genuinely embarrassed. "I'm sorry." He folded the map, backed onto the county road, and drove away. The sound of his truck faded into the distance. I stood there alone beside the fence, still looking at the dust hanging in the air. Something about that conversation didn't feel like a simple mistake. It felt practiced. as if the same instructions had already been repeated dozens of times before. Over the next several weeks, the pattern kept repeating. A utility crew stopped at the entrance asking for HOA approval before replacing a service line. A package delivery driver asked if he needed authorization to reach my front porch. Even a cable technician refused to continue until someone from Willow Creek confirmed he was allowed on the road. Different companies, different employees, same hesitation, same explanation. Every one of them had been taught exactly the same thing. Standing beside the sheriff that morning, watching him ignore Karen's binder while asking for county property records instead, I finally understood what all those small encounters had been trying to tell me. They weren't isolated mistakes. They were symptoms. Somewhere inside the HOA, one document had quietly become more trusted than the county records themselves. I just didn't know which document it was, or how many decisions had already been built on it. I drove back to the farmhouse with the sheriff's question still echoing in my head. Do you still have the original deed? Not a copy, not a summary. The original. My father would have appreciated that question. He always believed the truth gets stronger the closer you get to its source. The old farmhouse stood exactly where it always had, tucked beneath a row of oak trees at the end of the gravel road. Nothing about it suggested sheriff's deputies were waiting less than a quarter-mile away. I parked. The truck door shut with a solid thump. The porch steps creaked beneath my boots. Inside, the house was perfectly still. I walked straight to my father's study. His reading chair faced the pasture just as it always had. His glasses still rested beside an old legal pad. Even the faded coffee ring on the desk remained untouched. Some people inherit money. Some inherit businesses. My father left me something he considered far more valuable. Evidence. I opened the bottom drawer of the roll-top desk. The dented green metal document box was exactly where he had left it years earlier. I carried it into the kitchen and placed it on the table. The metal latch clicked open. Inside rested more than half a century of carefully preserved records. The original 1968 warranty deed, every certified survey, property tax receipts, title insurance policies, boundary inspections, even handwritten notes identifying survey monuments by their county control numbers. Nothing had been thrown away. Nothing had been misplaced. My father treated every document as if someone might need it 50 years later. Turns out, someone did. I picked up the original deed. The paper had yellowed with age, but the county seal remained sharp. June 1968. Samuel Mercer. My grandfather's signature. I smiled. He bought this land when it was nothing more than pasture, oak trees, and a narrow dirt road leading to the county highway. There wasn't a subdivision. There wasn't an HOA. There wasn't even a street name yet. I could still hear him laughing the first time he let me ride beside him on the tractor. Land remembers who takes care of it, he'd said. Years later, my father explained it differently. Ownership isn't proven by how loudly you defend it. It's proven by the records you protect. Every spring, he repaired washed-out gravel before anyone asked. Every fall, he walked the fence line looking for loose posts. Every few years, he hired a licensed surveyor, even though no one questioned the property line. I once asked him why he kept paying for surveys that all reached the same conclusion. He smiled. Because one good survey prevents 100 bad arguments. 6 months before he passed away, he carried this same green document box into the kitchen and placed it in front of me. One day, he said, someone you've never met is going to tell you where your property begins. I laughed. That sounds impossible. He didn't laugh back. No, it's inevitable. He tapped the lid of the box. When that day comes, don't try to win with opinions. Tap. Don't try to win with volume. Another tap. Then he rested his hand on the original deed. Win with this. Standing there in that quiet kitchen, I finally understood what he had been preparing me for. I placed the original deed into a leather folder. Then the certified survey. Then the latest county tax records. Before closing the box, I noticed one folded sheet tucked beneath the surveys. I'd never opened it before. It was written entirely in my father's handwriting. Just one sentence. If anyone ever questions your land, begin with the county, and let everyone else catch up later. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into the folder beside the deed. The metal latch snapped shut. I picked up the leather folder and headed back toward the truck. Karen had arrived carrying confidence. I was returning with 3 generations of proof. And somewhere between those two things, only one of them was about to survive the truth. People sometimes think this entire fight was about a gravel driveway. It wasn't. It was about everything waiting at the end of it. Every morning started the same way. I poured a cup of black coffee, opened the front door, stepped onto the porch before sunrise. The air always felt cooler there. The wind reached the oak trees first. Then the meadowlarks started singing. A few minutes later, sunlight rolled across the pasture my grandfather had cleared with his own hands. It wasn't dramatic. It was familiar. And after enough years, familiar becomes something worth protecting. Emily loved those mornings even more than I did. She'd step onto the porch carrying her coffee and smile before saying a single word. "Listen," she'd whisper. I'd stand still. The breeze, the birds, the leaves, nothing else. "Most people never hear this," she'd say. She was right. Every spring, Emily planted bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush along the western hillside. By April, the entire slope looked like someone had spilled paint across the grass. After she passed away, I kept planting them. Not because anyone expected me to. Because some promises deserve to outlive the people who make them. Every time I drove down that gravel road, I wasn't just driving home. I was driving through my own history. I could still picture my grandfather waving me over to his old tractor. "Easy on the clutch," he'd laugh. Years later, my father stood beside me after a heavy rainstorm, pointing at the washed-out gravel. "Fix it now," he said. "Small problems get expensive when you ignore them." Then there was Emily. Every evening, I'd see her headlights appear at the entrance. She always slowed down at the same oak tree before turning onto the driveway. Every single time. None of those memories appeared on a deed. None of them showed up on a survey. But they were the reason those documents mattered in the first place. Karen never saw any of that. She looked at the driveway and saw a shaded section on a laminated map. I looked at the same road and saw 3 generations of family. That's why I never became angry with the delivery drivers. They weren't trying to disrespect my property. They were following instructions. The contractors were doing the same thing. Even the security guard would eventually prove that. Karen was different. She wasn't simply following the story anymore. She had become the person telling it. Every violation notice carried her approval. Every contractor packet pointed to the same map. Every conversation ended with the same sentence. "That's HOA property." The more often she repeated it, the more certain she became. That's the strange thing about confidence. It grows very quickly when nobody stops to verify it. I slowed my truck as the subdivision entrance came back into view. The sheriff's patrol SUV was still parked beside the road. Karen was still standing there with her leather binder tucked under one arm. The old survey monument still rested quietly beside the fence, exactly where it had been for more than 50 years. Nothing on the property had changed while I was gone. The gravel hadn't moved. The fence hadn't moved. The survey markers certainly hadn't moved. Only the investigation had. The sheriff wasn't trying to decide whether I belonged there anymore. He was trying to decide which story deserved to be believed. One story came from a confident HOA president carrying a binder. The other came from 3 generations of county records buried inside a worn leather folder. In a few hours, those 2 stories would finally meet. And only one of them would leave standing. The sheriff told me the county would need a few days to compare both sets of records. He was right. For a while, nothing happened. At least, nothing official. But the story kept spreading. 3 mornings later, I was replacing a loose fence board near the entrance when a white delivery van slowed beside me. Gravel crackled under its tires. The driver rolled down his window. He looked uncomfortable before he even spoke. "Morning, sir." "Morning." He pointed toward my driveway. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Dispatch says this road belongs to the HOA." He hesitated. "Am I even allowed to drive up there?" I smiled. "Who told dispatch that?" He shrugged. "No idea. It's just what's in our system." I pointed toward the farmhouse in the distance. "That's my house." He looked surprised. "Seriously?" "Seriously." He laughed once. "Guess somebody needs to fix our records." "I'd start there." "Appreciate it." The van pulled away. I watched it disappear up my driveway without another question. Then I looked back toward the subdivision entrance. The mistake had grown much bigger than Karen. It had reached delivery companies, contractors, service providers. Complete strangers were now repeating the same story. That afternoon, I drove into Willow Creek instead of going home. I parked outside the clubhouse. The glass display case was exactly where I remembered it. Community notices, pool rules, holiday flyers, and right in the middle, the laminated map. I stood there for almost a minute just watching people interact with it. A landscaping crew arrived. Before unloading a single mower, the foreman walked over to the display. He studied the map, pointed toward my driveway. "We'll start there," he told his crew. I waited until he finished. "Morning. Morning, sir." I pointed at the display. "Do you use that map every day?" "Every job." "Who gave it to you?" "The HOA." "Have you ever compared it with the county plat?" He looked honestly confused. "No." A brief pause. "Why would I?" "Fair question." He wasn't careless. He wasn't stubborn. He simply trusted the document he'd been handed. I thanked him and walked inside the clubhouse. Karen looked up from the reception desk. She smiled immediately. "Mr. Mercer." "Mrs. Holloway." I held up my phone. "Can I ask you about this map?" "Certainly." I placed the photo on the counter. "Has anyone on the board compared this to the county records?" She barely looked at it. "Our attorney reviewed everything before the neighborhood opened." "That's not what I asked." She folded her arms. "Daniel, we've used that map for years." "I know." "Then why keep asking?" "Because contractors believe they need HOA permission to drive to my house." Karen shrugged. "They're following the community map." "Exactly." She smiled. "Then it seems to be working." I looked at her for a second. "Have you ever verified it?" Her answer came instantly. "We don't need to." "Why not?" "Because the board has complete confidence in our records." Nobody spoke. A homeowner waiting near the front desk quietly glanced from Karen to me. Even she looked uncertain. I nodded politely. "Thank you for your time." Karen smiled again. "You're welcome." As I walked back outside, I stopped one last time in front of the display case. Dozens of people probably passed that map every week. They trusted it because it looked official. Contractors trusted it. Delivery drivers trusted it. Karen trusted it. Nobody stopped to ask the county whether they should. I climbed into my truck and looked at the certified county records resting on the passenger seat. Somewhere between the recorder's office and the HOA clubhouse, one document had quietly replaced another. And for the first time since this all began, I stopped asking whether Karen believed the wrong story. I started asking where she had learned it in the first place. The next morning, I stopped trying to understand the HOA. It was time to understand the paperwork behind it. My father used to say property disputes are almost never solved by louder voices. They're solved by better records. So instead of driving toward Willow Creek, I headed into town. The county recorder's office occupied an old brick building that had been standing decades before the subdivision even existed. The front door chimed as I stepped inside. A clerk looked up from behind the counter. "Morning. Can I help you?" I handed her my parcel number. "I'd like every recorded document connected to this property." She typed for a few seconds. Then she smiled. "Mercer property?" "Yes, ma'am." "Give me just a minute." She disappeared through a doorway marked records. I waited quietly. A minute later, she returned, pushing a cart stacked with oversized plat books and certified files. The wheels rattled softly across the tile floor. She spread the first documents across the counter. "Let's start here." She opened the recorded subdivision plat. Her finger traced the entrance road. Then it stopped. "The subdivision ends here." She moved her finger a few inches farther. "Your parcel begins here." I leaned closer. "The legal boundary. Match my family's deed exactly." "Any recorded transfer to the HOA?" I asked. She searched the index again. "No." "Any recorded easement giving the HOA ownership?" Another search. "No." "Any amended plat changing the boundary?" She looked up and shook her head. "No." She tapped the county seal printed across the bottom of the page. "Everything on file says this entrance road belongs to parcel 17B. Could I get certified copies?" "Absolutely." She reached for the county stamp. Thump. One page. Thump. Another. The steady rhythm echoed through the quiet office. Halfway through stamping the stack, she paused. "Can I ask what's going on?" "The HOA says I've been trespassing on their property." She looked down at the plat again, then back at me. "If that's their position." She rested one finger on the county seal. "They didn't get it from these records." I thanked her and gathered the certified copies into a folder. But I wasn't finished yet. Before leaving town, I met with a licensed county surveyor whose office sat just a few blocks away. He studied the deed for less than a minute before looking up. "Boundary dispute?" "Apparently." He smiled. "Let's see what the monuments have to say." 3 days later, he met me at the entrance carrying a GPS receiver, a survey rod, and copies of the recorded plats. The equipment clicked into place over the first steel survey monument. We waited while the receiver locked onto its coordinates. Got it, he said. Then we walked to the second monument farther down the fence line. Another reading. Another pause. He compared both locations with the county survey. Finally, he looked up. They match. Both of them. Exactly. He tapped the old monument lightly with his boot. This marker has probably been telling the truth longer than either of us has been alive. He handed me a signed survey report. Your deed. The county plat. The survey monuments. They all agree. For independent sources were now saying exactly the same thing. My grandfather's original deed. The county recorder. The recorded subdivision plat. The licensed survey. Yet contractors still believe the HOA owned my driveway. Delivery companies still repeated the same story. That evening I spread everything across my dining room table. Certified county records on one side. Photographs from the HOA clubhouse on the other. At first glance, the two maps looked almost identical. Same entrance. Same streets. Same neighborhood. Then something caught my eye. A tiny engineering company logo printed in the lower corner of the laminated HOA map. I leaned closer. County plats don't carry engineering company logos. Construction drawings do. Hold on. I whispered. I picked up the photograph and looked again. The answer wasn't hiding inside the county records anymore. It was hiding inside the map Karen trusted the most. And for the first time since this started, I realized we weren't comparing two different property maps at all. We were comparing two completely different kinds of documents. I couldn't stop looking at the engineering company logo. It was barely noticeable. Just a small mark in the lower corner of the laminated map. Most people would never have paid attention to it. Now it was the only thing I could see. I pulled the certified county plat closer. No engineering logo. No private company name. Just the county seal, recording information, and the legal description of every parcel. I looked back at the photograph from the clubhouse. Same entrance. Same roads. Same neighborhood. But suddenly, it didn't feel like the same document anymore. That can't be a coincidence, I said quietly. The next morning I drove back to Willow Creek. Not to confront Karen. Not yet. I wanted to watch what everyone else was doing. A landscaping crew had just arrived. Before unloading a single mower, the foreman walked straight to the glass display case outside the clubhouse. He studied the laminated map for a few seconds. Then he pointed toward my driveway. We'll start over there, he told his crew. Got it, another worker replied. I waited until they finished talking. Morning. The foreman smiled. Morning, sir. I pointed toward the display. Do you use that map every day? Every job. Who gave it to you? The HOA office. Have you ever seen the county plat? He looked genuinely confused. No, sir. A short pause. Why would I? Fair question. He wasn't being difficult. He simply trusted the document he'd been given. Another contractor walked over carrying a clipboard. Before saying a word, he glanced at the same laminated map. Then he nodded to the crew. Let's get started. I watched them drive away. Same map. Same assumption. Same mistake. Back at the farmhouse, I enlarged one of the clubhouse photographs on my computer. The image became grainy as I zoomed in, but the lower corner slowly came into focus. Beneath the engineering company logo were several tiny lines of print. I leaned closer. Come on. Most of the words had been cut off by the frame holding the laminated map. Only the tops of a few letters remained visible. Someone hadn't just laminated the drawing. Part of it had disappeared. I printed the photograph and placed it beside the certified county plat. The difference was impossible to ignore now. The county plat showed every legal note across the bottom of the page. The HOA display didn't. Something had been cropped. Whether it happened by accident or during printing, I had no idea. But I knew where the complete version would still exist. The county archives. I picked up my phone and called Laura. She answered almost immediately. Morning, Daniel. I think I finally know what we're looking at. Papers shuffled on the other end of the line. Tell me, the HOA isn't using the county plat. Then what are they using? I looked down at the engineering logo one more time. I think they're using a construction exhibit. Silence. Then I heard Laura pull a legal pad closer. If you're right, she said slowly, everything starts making sense. That's what I was thinking. Contractors wouldn't question it. Exactly. Delivery companies wouldn't question it. Right. Neither would the HOA. Another pause. Then Laura spoke again. Daniel. Yes. Discovery number one isn't that the map is wrong. She let the sentence hang in the air for a moment. It's that the map may never have been created to answer an ownership question in the first place. I looked out the kitchen window toward the gravel road stretching across my property. The road hadn't changed. Neither had the county records. The only thing that had changed was the document everyone had decided to believe. And if the original engineering drawing still existed in the county archives, I had a feeling it was about to explain why an entire neighborhood had spent 8 months defending a mistake printed on the wrong piece of paper. Laura asked me to bring every photograph I'd taken inside the clubhouse. By the time I arrived at her office, the conference table was covered with papers. Certified county records on one side, my printed photographs on the other. She didn't say a word for almost 5 minutes. She compared one page after another. Then she looked up. "Daniel." "What?" She tapped the engineering company logo with her pen. "This isn't a property map." "That's what I was afraid of." "No." She smiled slightly. "That's what we were hoping for." I frowned. "Why?" "Because if it's not a property map," she tapped the county plat beside it, "then we know exactly where to find the real one." An hour later, we walked into the county recorder's office together. The same clerk recognized us immediately. "Back again." Laura smiled. "One more search." "Looking for what?" Every engineering exhibit submitted by the developer before Willow Creek was completed. The clerk disappeared into the archive room. A few minutes later, she returned, pushing another cart loaded with oversized plan sets. The wheels rattled across the floor. We spent nearly 2 hours opening one drawing after another. Utility plans, drainage plans, landscape layouts, construction staging diagrams. Most had nothing to do with ownership. Laura kept turning pages. Then she stopped. "Wait." I looked up. She slowly unfolded a large engineering drawing across the table. My eyes went straight to the entrance road. Same streets, same shaded areas, same engineering logo. "That's it," I whispered. Laura didn't answer. She was reading the notes printed beneath the legend. Then she slid the drawing toward me. "Read that line." I leaned closer. 8 words were printed in small, clear letters. "For construction reference only. Not a record of property ownership." I read them twice, then a third time. Everything suddenly fit together. The landscaping crews, the delivery companies, the contractors, the security guard, Karen. Every one of them had trusted a construction exhibit, not a recorded ownership document. Laura folded her arms. "This drawing tells builders where to work." She tapped the disclaimer. "It was never designed to tell anyone who owns the land." I looked back at the photograph from the clubhouse. "Then why is the HOA treating it like a deed?" Laura gave a small shrug. "That's a question they'll eventually have to answer." She placed the engineering exhibit beside the certified county plat. The difference was obvious now. One showed legal ownership. The other showed construction logistics. Similar appearance. Completely different purpose. We requested certified copies of both documents. The county clerk stamped each page one at a time. Thump, thump, thump. She smiled as she handed them back. "Find what you were looking for?" Laura closed the folder. "We found what everyone else missed." The drive back was unusually quiet. Neither of us needed to guess anymore. We finally understood why so many people believed the HOA. They weren't reading the wrong county record. They weren't reading a county record at all. The next morning, another certified envelope arrived from the HOA attorney. I opened it at the kitchen table. Another demand letter. Another warning. Another deadline. I called Laura. "They want me to stop using what they call association-controlled property immediately." "Anything else?" "They're threatening additional legal action." "Good." I laughed. "You're the only lawyer I've ever heard celebrate another demand letter." "Because every letter creates another timestamp." "Meaning?" "Meaning they're putting their position in writing." She paused. "And every time they do, they're relying on the same construction exhibit instead of the county records." 2 days later, I turned onto the county road and immediately hit the brakes. A temporary metal gate blocked my driveway. Fresh white signs had been bolted to both sides. "Private HOA property. Authorized access only." Gravel crunched as I stopped. A uniformed security guard stepped out of a folding chair beside the gate. He looked nervous. "Morning, sir." "Morning." He glanced at the laminated map hanging inside the temporary guard station. Same engineering logo. Same shaded roadway. Same mistake. "I'm sorry," he said. "I've been instructed not to let anyone through without HOA authorization." I looked at the gate, then at the map, then back at him. "You're just doing your job." He nodded gratefully. I turned the truck around and called Laura before reaching the highway. She answered on the first ring. They blocked the driveway. I expected they might. Should I remove the gate? No. Why not? I heard papers closing on her desk. Because the county hasn't seen it yet. A short pause. By the time they do. Another pause. That gate won't be an obstacle anymore. What will it be? Laura's answer came without hesitation. Evidence. Laura called before sunrise. Don't answer anything from the HOA today, she said. Meet me at the county recorder's office in an hour. There was something different in her voice. Calm, confident, final. By the time I arrived, she already had a conference table covered with certified records. My grandfather's deed, the recorded subdivision plat, the certified survey, the engineering exhibit. Every document sat in its own neat stack. Morning, I said. Morning. She didn't look up immediately. She kept reading one page, then another. Finally, she closed the last folder. I stopped asking what your family owns. What are you asking now? She slid another certified file toward me. What the HOA actually owns. That question changed everything. For the next 2 hours, we reviewed every recorded transfer connected to Willow Creek. The clubhouse, recorded deed. The neighborhood park, recorded deed. The retention pond, recorded deed. Internal subdivision roads, recorded deed. Every HOA-owned parcel followed the same pattern. Recorded, indexed, easy to verify. Then we reached the entrance road. Laura stopped turning pages. Notice anything? I looked down. The recorded subdivision plat ended exactly where the stone entrance monument stood. My driveway continued beyond it as parcel 17B. Exactly the same way it appeared on every county record we'd reviewed. Now compare it. She unfolded the original engineering exhibit beside the plat. Same entrance, same roads, same shaded areas, different purpose. She tapped the disclaimer. Read it again. I already knew the words. Still, I read them aloud. For construction reference only. Not a record of property ownership. Nobody said anything for a moment. Even the county clerk walking past our table slowed down. Laura reached into another folder and placed Karen's certified trespassing complaint beside the engineering exhibit. This, she said quietly, is discovery number 2. I looked at both documents, then back at her. Because they relied on the wrong drawing? More than that. She tapped the complaint. The HOA officially represented to the county that you were trespassing. Tap. Her finger moved to the engineering exhibit. And this is the document supporting that claim. She let the silence sit for a moment. A construction exhibit that specifically says it cannot be used to establish ownership. I leaned back in my chair. Everything lined up. The warning letters. The violation notices. The contractor packets. The security guard. The temporary gate. Every decision traced back to the same document. Not the deed. Not the county plat. The construction exhibit. Laura opened a new binder. The rings clicked softly. First section. Certified county records. Click. Second section. Engineering exhibit. Click. Third section. HOA letters. Click. Fourth section. Photographs of the gate, warning signs, and clubhouse display. Finally, she clipped the certified trespassing complaint to the front. She closed the binder. Done. That's everything? I asked. Almost. She picked up her phone and called the county attorney's office. Good morning, she said. I'd like to request a field review before any action is taken on the complaint. She listened for a few seconds. Yes, we'd like the county to compare the recorded ownership documents with the engineering exhibit on site. Another pause. Thank you. She ended the call. Now we wait. We didn't wait long. Late the following afternoon, my phone rang. Laura didn't waste a second. The county attorney reviewed the file. And they don't want to decide this from behind a desk. Meaning, they're coming to the property. I stood and looked out the kitchen window toward the temporary gate still blocking my driveway. Who? The sheriff. Okay. The county survey specialist. Okay. The county attorney. Who else? Both attorneys. Both parties. Everyone. A long silence followed. Finally, I asked, when? Friday morning. I looked toward the old survey monument beside the fence. It had been waiting there for more than 50 years. Now it had a date. Anything I should do before then? Laura answered immediately. Bring every original document your father saved. That's easy. One more thing. She paused. Don't argue with Karen again. Why? Because Friday isn't about opinions anymore. Another pause. Friday belongs to the records. I ended the call and looked at the leather folder resting on the kitchen table. My grandfather's deed. My father's surveys. 50 years of county records. They had spent decades quietly telling the same story. On Friday morning, everyone else was finally going to hear it. Friday morning arrived cool and unusually quiet. I reached the entrance a few minutes before 8. My father's leather folder rested on the passenger seat beside me. The temporary gates still blocked the driveway. The white warning signs were exactly where Karen had ordered them placed. Private HOA property. Authorized access only. For a moment, everything looked exactly the way it had the week before. Then the county began arriving. One sheriff's SUV pulled onto the shoulder. Then another. Gravel crackled beneath the tires. The younger deputy stepped out first and quietly stretched a rope line along the edge of the entrance to keep curious homeowners back. A white county pickup arrived moments later. The county survey specialist climbed out carrying a GPS receiver, a tripod, and a survey rod. He didn't greet anyone. He walked straight to the old steel survey monument. Click. The tripod locked into place. Click. The receiver settled over the marker. Karen watched from across the driveway. Morning, Sheriff, she called confidently. Morning, Mrs. Holloway. His answer was polite. Nothing more. Mr. Mercer. Morning, Sheriff. Did you bring the originals? Yes, sir. Good. Laura arrived a minute later carrying a single leather case. She stopped beside me. Ready? As ready as I'll ever be. She smiled. Remember your father's advice. I nodded. Let the record speak. Exactly. Before we could say another word, another vehicle pulled in. The county attorney stepped out carrying a slim file. He shook hands with both attorneys, greeted the sheriff, then walked directly to the folding table waiting beside the driveway. No speeches, no introductions, just quiet professionalism. Homeowners continued gathering behind the rope line. More phones appeared. This time, though, nobody pointed them at me. Every camera faced the table. Karen noticed. She straightened her blazer and confidently placed her thick leather binder in the center of the table. Everything the association relies on is here, she announced. The sheriff rested one hand on it. Thank you. She smiled. Would you like to start with our documents? We'll review everything. Our attorney organized it by subject. I'm sure he did. He turned toward Laura. Ms. Bennett. Laura placed her leather case beside Karen's binder. Certified copies. Originals. Survey reports. Everything requested. The sheriff nodded. Excellent. The county survey specialist finished calibrating the GPS receiver. Ready whenever you are. The sheriff looked around once. Everyone who needed to be there had arrived. The deputies stood quietly near the rope line. The county attorney opened his notebook. Karen folded her hands on top of the binder. Laura waited without saying a word. Even the breeze seemed to settle. The sheriff closed his notebook. Before anyone makes another statement. His voice carried easily across the crowd. I want everyone to understand why we're here. Nobody interrupted. This isn't a debate. He looked at Karen, then at me. It isn't about who argues better. He rested one hand on Karen's binder. His other hand moved to Laura's leather case. Today we're answering one question. A long pause followed. Somewhere behind the crowd, a truck door closed. Then everything was quiet again. Do these two sets of records tell the same story? Karen answered first. They absolutely do. Laura said nothing. She simply unlocked her case. The metal clasp clicked open. I looked toward the old survey monument standing beside the fence. It had witnessed more than 50 years of quiet mornings without asking for anyone's attention. Today, for the first time, an entire crowd had gathered because of it. I realized something then. The monument had never been waiting to prove my family right. It had simply been waiting for the county to ask it the right question. And in the next few minutes, opinions would finally step aside. The records were about to speak for themselves. The sheriff looked around the folding table one last time. Karen stood on one side with her leather binder. Laura stood on the other with a single leather case. The county attorney opened his notebook. The survey specialist adjusted his GPS receiver. Behind the rope line, more than 50 homeowners waited in complete silence. Nobody wanted another argument. They wanted an answer. The sheriff rested both hands on the table. Here's how we're going to do this. He looked from Karen to Laura. Nobody interrupts. A pause. Nobody argues. Another pause. We'll review the county records first, then the HOA records. Finally, We'll verify everything on the ground. Karen nodded confidently. That's perfectly fine. She pushed her binder forward. Everything the association relies on is right here. Thank you. The sheriff didn't open it. Instead, he looked toward Laura. Ms. Bennett. Laura unlocked her leather case. Click. She removed 4 certified documents and placed them on the table one at a time. The original 1968 warranty deed, the recorded subdivision plat, the certified county survey. Finally, the original engineering exhibit recovered from the county archives. The county survey specialist stepped closer. Let's begin. He compared the deed with the subdivision plat, then the plat with the certified survey. Finally, he unfolded the engineering exhibit beside them. The pages rustled in the morning breeze. I'd like to verify the monuments first, he said. He picked up the GPS receiver and walked toward the old steel survey marker. The crowd watched without a sound. The receiver settled over the monument. A soft electronic tone broke the silence. Coordinates locked. He walked to the second monument farther down the fence line. Another reading. Another tone. Coordinates locked. He returned to the table carrying the receiver. Both survey monuments matched the recorded county survey within professional tolerance. The sheriff looked up, meaning, the legal property boundary on the ground matches the legal boundary recorded by the county. Karen leaned forward immediately. But our property map clearly includes the entrance road. Let's compare it, the survey specialist replied. He placed the laminated HOA map beside the original engineering exhibit. From a distance, they looked almost identical. Same entrance, same roads, same shaded driveway. One homeowner whispered, "They're exactly the same." "No," the survey specialist said quietly. "They're not." He slid the engineering exhibit toward Karen. "Mrs. Holloway, would you read the note printed beneath the legend?" Karen leaned closer. Her eyes moved across the page. She stopped. The confidence on her face faded just a little. 5 seconds passed. She didn't speak. The sheriff looked toward the HOA attorney. "Counsel." The attorney slowly removed his glasses. He read the sentence in a calm voice. "For construction reference only. Not a record of property ownership." Nobody moved. One phone slowly lowered. Another homeowner quietly folded the HOA newsletter he had been holding. Even the deputies stopped writing. The survey specialist lifted the recorded subdivision plat. This document establishes legal ownership. He placed it beside the engineering exhibit. Then he tapped the second page. This document coordinates construction work. Tap. Landscaping. Tap. Utilities. Tap. Contractor access. He looked around the table. They were never intended to establish the same thing. Karen finally found her voice. "But we've always used that map." The county attorney answered. Gently, "I believe you." He pointed toward the disclaimer. "The problem is that the engineers who created it specifically warned against using it to determine ownership." Silence settled over the entrance again. Laura never interrupted. She didn't need to. The documents were doing exactly what she said they would do. The survey specialist traced one finger across the recorded subdivision plat. "The subdivision ends here." His finger moved to my driveway. "Parcel 17B begins here." He opened the original deed. The legal description matches. He lifted the certified survey. The monuments match. Finally, he looked at the county attorney. "The county has no recorded deed transferring this entrance road to the HOA. No recorded easement. No amended plat. No dedication. Nothing supporting the association's ownership claim." Karen slowly turned toward her attorney. "Is that true?" He hesitated, cleared his throat, looked down once more at the county records. Then he nodded. Yes. It was the first honest answer she hadn't expected. The sheriff gently closed Karen's binder and slid it back across the table. "Mrs. Holloway," he said respectfully, "your trespassing complaint states that Mr. Mercer repeatedly entered HOA property." He rested one hand on the original deed. According to the recorded deed, his hand moved to the subdivision plat, the county plat, then the certified survey, the licensed survey. Finally, he pointed toward the old steel monument standing quietly beside the driveway, and the original county survey monuments. He paused. Nobody breathed. Mr. Mercer never left his own property. No applause followed. No celebration. The truth didn't need either one. The sheriff looked toward the deputies. "Remove the gate." "Yes, sir." The chain rattled as one deputy unlocked it. The second rolled the barrier off the driveway. The private security guard stepped back without protest. Then the county survey specialist walked to the old monument carrying a bright orange county marker. He drove it firmly into the ground beside the original steel cap. "This identifies the verified property line," he announced. "If anyone has another ownership question in the future." He looked back at the crowd. "Start with the county records." I looked down the gravel road leading to the farmhouse my grandfather bought, my father protected, and I still called home. The road had never moved. The boundary had never moved. The truth had never moved. That morning, for the first time, everyone else finally did. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. The only sound came from the chain rattling through the lock as one deputy removed it from the temporary gate. Metal scraped against gravel. The second deputy rolled the barrier off my driveway. Slowly, deliberately. Every homeowner watched. The white warning signs came down next. Private HOA property. Authorized access only. One deputy loosened the bolts. The other caught the sign before it hit the ground. The private security guard picked it up. He walked toward me with his cap tucked under one arm. "Mr. Mercer." "Yes." He held out his hand. "I owe you an apology." I shook it. "You were following instructions." He glanced back at the folded sign. "I believed the paperwork. So did a lot of people." He nodded once. "Not anymore." Without another word, he carried the signs to his truck and drove away. Karen never looked up. Her leather binder remained closed on the folding table. She rested both hands on it, as if opening it again might somehow change what everyone had just heard. It didn't. An older homeowner finally stepped forward. He had lived in Willow Creek since the first homes were built. "Karen." His voice was calm. "Can I ask you something?" She looked up slowly. "When did the board ever verify ownership with the county?" Karen hesitated. "We relied on the developer's documents." "That's not what I asked." Silence. Another homeowner unfolded an old HOA newsletter. The paper crackled in the morning breeze. "This says Daniel Mercer repeatedly trespassed on association property." She looked directly at Karen. "Was that true?" Karen lowered her eyes. "No." Nobody interrupted her. Nobody defended her. A retired civil engineer stepped forward carrying a printed copy of the engineering exhibit. He held it high enough for everyone behind him to see. "I've worked with construction drawings for 35 years. He tapped the bottom of the page. "This disclaimer isn't hidden." Tap. "It isn't technical language." Tap. "It's plain English." He looked around the crowd. Did anyone on the board actually read it? Nobody answered. One board member quietly removed his name badge. Another stared at the ground. A third slowly closed his notebook. The sheriff stepped toward the table. "Ladies and gentlemen." His voice remained steady. Today's review wasn't about choosing who sounded more convincing. He lifted the recorded subdivision plat. "This establishes ownership." He held up the engineering exhibit. "This guides construction." He placed them side by side. They were never intended to do the same job. One homeowner raised his hand. "So Daniel was never trespassing?" The county attorney answered before anyone else could. "No." Another voice came from the back. "Then why did the HOA hire attorneys?" Someone else added. "What about the security company? Who approved the gate? Who signed the violation letters?" The questions came one after another. Not from reporters. Not from lawyers. From the homeowners themselves. Laura quietly closed her leather case. Click. She leaned toward me. Now they're asking the right questions. 3 weeks later, every seat inside the county courtroom was filled. Homeowners lined the back wall. The judge reviewed the certified deed, the recorded subdivision plat, the licensed survey, the engineering exhibit, the sheriff's report, photographs of the locked gate. Then he looked toward the HOA attorney. "Counsel." A brief pause. "Can you identify any recorded county document transferring Mr. Mercer's driveway to the homeowners association?" The attorney stood. He looked at Karen for just a moment before answering. "No, Your Honor." "Any recorded easement?" "No, Your Honor." "Any amended plat?" "No, Your Honor." "Any recorded dedication?" "No, Your Honor." The judge nodded once. Then the county records resolved the ownership issue. He dismissed every claim against me. Then he continued. The association is ordered to remove or correct every contractor packet, newsletter, website, graphic, display map, and published document representing Parcel 17B as HOA property unless it matches the official county records. He closed the file. Future ownership claims must be supported by recorded county documents. His gavel struck once. Case dismissed. That evening, the Willow Creek clubhouse was standing room only. Homeowners filled every chair. Others stood along the walls. Copies of the court order rested in almost every hand. Karen sat quietly at the front table. She never reached for her binder. The retired engineer walked to the projector. He placed the engineering exhibit on the screen. The disclaimer filled the wall behind the board. For construction reference only. Not a record of property ownership. Nobody needed an explanation anymore. They could all read it for themselves. One homeowner stood. We trusted the board. Another stood. We trusted the documents. A third quietly added. We never checked the county. One by one, the remaining board members admitted they had never compared the engineering exhibit with the recorded subdivision plat. They assumed someone else already had. Karen never interrupted them. She never argued. She never blamed anyone else. For the first time since I met her, she simply listened. As the meeting ended, the homeowners voted to commission an independent review of every HOA property map, contractor packet, ownership policy, and legal procedure before another letter could ever be sent. I slipped out the side door before anyone noticed. Outside, the evening air felt strangely quiet. I looked toward the gravel road leading home. It was exactly where it had always been. The truth hadn't defeated the HOA that day. The truth had simply outlasted every mistake built on the wrong piece of paper. A month later, Willow Creek looked exactly the way it should have looked from the beginning. The temporary gate was gone. The warning signs had disappeared. The folding guard station had been hauled away. Delivery trucks rolled through without stopping. Contractors drove past the entrance without asking for HOA approval. Nobody questioned the gravel road anymore. They simply used it for what it had always been. A road leading to my home. Early one Saturday morning, I poured a cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch before sunrise. The air was cool. The meadowlarks were already singing. The first light drifted across the pasture just as it had every morning for decades. Some things don't notice controversy. They simply keep showing up. I walked slowly down the gravel driveway. My boots crunched softly beneath me. A few minutes later, I reached the old steel survey monument. Right beside it stood the bright orange county marker installed after the county review. The old monument had quietly protected the boundary for more than 50 years. The new marker simply reminded everyone else where it had always been. I rested one hand on the weathered steel cap. Dad, I smiled to myself. You were right. The wind moved gently through the oak trees. It almost sounded like an answer. A pickup truck slowed near the entrance. The driver climbed out and walked toward me. It was the same homeowner who had muttered, "About time." The morning Karen accused me of trespassing. He looked a little embarrassed. "Morning, Mr. Mercer." "Morning." He stopped beside the county marker. "I've been wanting to talk to you." "Sure." He looked down at the gravel for a second. "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." I believed something I never verified. I nodded. Most people did. He looked toward the orange county marker. "Funny thing is." He smiled quietly. "The truth was sitting here the whole time." "It usually is." He laughed. "I guess I learned something." "What's that?" He pointed toward the marker. "Confidence isn't evidence." I smiled. "No, it isn't." He shook my hand before climbing back into his truck. This time, as he drove away, he didn't glance toward the subdivision entrance. He looked at the county marker instead. Later that afternoon, I walked into my father's study. The room felt exactly the same as it always had. The reading chair, the old desk, the faded coffee ring. I opened the bottom drawer and lifted out the green metal document box. The latch clicked open. Inside rested 3 generations of carefully protected history. I added 4 new documents to the stack. The sheriff's final report, the certified survey confirmation, the judge's dismissal order, and the court order requiring the HOA to correct every published ownership reference. I placed them neatly on top of my grandfather's original 1968 deed. Then I closed the lid. Click. The sound echoed through the quiet room. My grandfather had started the story. My father had preserved it. All I had done was protect it long enough for the truth to catch up. Before sliding the box back into the drawer, I remembered something my father told me years earlier while we stood beside that same gravel road. People think fences protect property. He smiled as he looked across the pasture. They don't. He picked up a handful of gravel and let it fall through his fingers. Wood rots. Gates rust. Signs come down. A brief pause. The records are what last. Back then, I thought he was talking about paperwork. Now I knew he was talking about responsibility. As the sun settled behind the oak trees, I carried my coffee back onto the porch. A delivery truck appeared at the entrance. It turned onto the driveway without slowing down. No questions, no permission, no hesitation. Exactly the way it should have been all along. I watched it disappear toward the house and couldn't help smiling. Karen believed she was protecting HOA property. Instead, she reminded an entire community of something far more important. Ownership isn't decided by confidence. It isn't